Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the New York City Bar. Thank you for the audience. Thank you for the panelists and the City Bar technical assistants with us. Thank you so much for being here. And welcome to the New York City Bar Association African Affairs event on the legacy of colonialism in today's Africa. We also like to thank our committee, the other committee who's sponsoring this event, which is the Cyrus R. Vance Center for International Justice. Our moderator will introduce you to this great panel and subject. And beforehand, I would like to introduce, and it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to our moderator, Alhaji Dr. Aboubakary Siddiq Ahmed. Dr. Alhaji Aboubakary Siddiq Ahmed is the station manager of Radio Universe of the University of Ghana, the first established independent private station in Ghana after the promulgation of the Fourth Republican Constitution of 1992. That ushered in yet another attempt of multi-party democracy in Ghana. Dr. Ahmed is the president of the Campus Broadcaster Association of Ghana. Prior to becoming a station manager, Dr. Ahmed pursued a training in media and broadcasting management at the Deutsche Welle Radio Academy in Cologne and Berlin, Germany. Dr. Ahmed also benefited from the United States International Visitor Program in media personnel in developing countries in the late 90s. Dr. Ahmed has since been teaching, practicing, training, and mentoring students in various departments at the University of Ghana and other media training institutions. Ahmed is also a part-time lecturer in medical communication at Accra College of Medicine, and he was the first to introduce critical media review in Ghana at a period when people feared to speak truth to power after a long period of military dictatorship despite democratization. Dr. Ahmed also served on the Ghana National Media Commission, NMC, and was among a pioneer team invited by Article 19, a reputable non-governmental organization to discuss the first democratic regulatory guideline for Africa media regulators in Kampala, Uganda. He is a member of the Order of the Volta Civic Division for his contribution in media in Ghana. It was a presidential state honor. Finally, the expertise of Dr. Ahmed, as you see, it's very wide, which covers a variety of areas, including policy and regulation, media management, communication for development, cultural study, ethics, communication, media, broadcasting, content development, production, and presentation. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for accepting this invitation. And thank you so much again for the panelists, New York City Bar, and our co-sponsoring committee. And the floor is yours, Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I'm humbled. And let me use this opportunity to welcome all those who are with us on this very, very, very important and timely program. For the panelists, I think you have a lot of responsibility to convince the doubting Thomases that colonialism indeed has its ups and downs, but generally speaking, it has been a negative experience for the African continent as we speak. And so let me start by first introducing the speakers to our citizens who are with us this evening. I would start with Her Excellency, that is Dr. Ambassador Arikana Chihombori Kwao. Unfortunately, I haven't seen her yet, but I'd want to believe that she would join us. And so when she does, she, frankly speaking, doesn't need introduction, but we will still do that. The next speaker is Dr. Ndongo Samba Sila, Program Manager, West Africa Office of the Rosa Luxembourg Foundation in Dakar, Senegal, co-founder of CORA, collective pour le renouveau africain, who co-opted Africa's last colonial currency, the CFA franc. And frankly speaking, when you go onto the net and you Google that name, it comes out and you see a lot of contributions that he's made in this particular field. And so Dr. Samba Silla, thank you for also accepting to speak. It has been very, very wonderful to see you physically, of course, through the technology that we are having today. And I do hope that you would have you would be able to deliver to the expectation of all of us. I have no doubt at all whatsoever. Now, let me move on to my next speaker. The next speaker, unfortunately, I have mixed up my papers here with all apologies, but I'll get it and then introduce Dr. Amin in a jiffy. And so we would take off as we wait on Dr. or Her Excellency, Dr. Ambassador Arikana Chioborikwao to join us. And so let me call on Dr. Ndongo Samba Silla to first start with the program by introducing us to his topic. And so Dr. Silla, once again, you are welcome and we want to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, Mr. Moderator. It's a great pleasure to be here among you today at the invitation of the New York City Bar. So I would like to thank the New York City Bar, all the organizers, in particular Doris Tuyu and Scott Kaplan for having me with you at this panel. So with the authorization, I will share my screen as I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Do you see my screen?
We don't see your presentation. We only see the file.
Right.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Oh.
You have to double click. You have to double click on the PowerPoint, and then that should open.
Yeah, I did it.
Try to share your screen again and try to share your PowerPoint again.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. And then from beginning.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
Oh,
we now
okay,
see
great.
it. Yes, good.
Great, great. So my talk will be about the CFA franc as an example of a vivid legacy of colonialism in today's Africa. So at the outset, I have to say that it's not a straightforward exercise to talk about the legacy of colonialism because some African compatriots and a significant part of Western public opinion see in such a discourse an easy way to blaming external actors, notably the former colonizers, for the turpitudes of the African continent. Many people hold such a view. To my opinion, this type of point of view is erroneous from 2 points of view. First, formal independence in Africa has not put an end to all aspects of colonialism. The Africanization of political and administrative institutions continues to coexist with realities of colonialism, such as cultural alienation, the installation of military bases, and economic and monetary domination. In other words, the non-administrative aspects of classical European colonialism are still relevant in most of Africa. And open state violence against populations, as in colonial times, has not disappeared. It has just been Africanized to some extent. The second limitation of the point of view saying that it's easy to blame other peoples or other actors for how to put it is that the distinction between internal and external factors is not really meaningful for countries that had been under the yoke of imperialism, at least since the colonial era until now. When one sees the brutal behavior of African despots, the lack of regard for political liberties, corruption, waste, etc., it's tempting to see these perceived internal realities as weighing more heavily than factors considered to be of external origin. This is a common misconception because the perceived internal realities cannot be understood without the external factors, especially imperialism. The condition of most African countries is one in which the legitimate and democratic expression of the people weighs less than external dictates. The repressive nature of the regimes in place is somehow a reflection of the state of affairs. The latter are accountable to the outside world rather than to their people. And I'll try to illustrate this preliminary comment with the case of the CFA franc, which is the last colonial currency still circulating in Africa. I had done, let's say, research during the last years on this currency in order to expose its limitation, but also to show why it is a legacy of colonialism that is detrimental to African development and African democracy. So the CFA franc is the acronym for a currency born in 1945 during colonial times. Originally, it meant the franc of the French colonies in Africa, but it had been renamed after the independencies. Originally, it circulated in the sub-Saharan part of the French colonial empire as a single currency for the sub-Saharan part of the French colonial empire. 75 years later, even 76 years later after its birth, the CFA franc remains a colonial currency. That means a French-controlled currency system operating in 14 African countries. And in this picture, you could see those 14 African countries. You have 8 in the West Africa. They belong to the West African Monetary Union. So you have the likes of Senegal, Mali, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Togo, Benin, and Niger, and also Guinea-Bissau. In Central Africa, you have the countries of the CIMAC, and among them you have 6 countries, Chad, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Gabon, Congo-Brazzaville, and Equatorial Guinea. Each monetary bloc has its own single currency named the CFA franc, but the name of the acronym is different according to the monetary bloc, and they also have each their own central bank. So since its origins, 1945 to nowadays, the CFA rested on 3 main pillars and 2 so-called counterparts. The first pillar is the fixed peg to the French currency. Originally, it was a French franc, and the French franc has been replaced with the euro since 1999. So the fixed peg means that the CFA franc value, external value, is fixed to the value of the French currency. That means it evolves in the same way, in the same proportion as the French currency is evolving. And the free transferability, the second pillar, means that there is a free movement of capitals and incomes between CFA franc countries and between them and France. So this has been very important for French metropolitan capital, the ability to invest and disinvest freely and repatriate capitals and incomes. The third principle is the convertibility guarantee by the French Treasury. This looks like a pompous term, but it just means that whenever the central banks, the BCAO and the BEAC, are devoid of any foreign exchange, the French Treasury will step in and will lend them the desired amount of the of franc exchange in its own currency. So previously in French franc, and since 1999 in euro. So it's a promise to lend. But there has been a counterpart to that. The first counterpart is that the central banks had been obliged to deposit with the French treasury most of their franc exchange reserves. After the independence, it was 100%. This has been lowered to 50% since the mid-2000s. The second counterpart is that the French government is represented in the organs of both central banks with a veto power. Originally, the veto power was expressly written in the statutes of the central banks, but now it has become implicit because any major decision requires the consensus of all representatives, including the French ones. So these are the working principles. So the question you might ask, why did the CFA franc using countries still use this currency while most other African countries have their own currency? In fact, this has to do with the way these countries obtained their independence. Because France, most African countries belonged to monetary blocs during colonial times. But when they decolonized, they started to, let's say, to issue their own national currency. So they exited from the sterling area, for example, for Anglophone countries, the Belgian monetary zone for countries that had been colonized by Belgium, the Escudo zone for those that had been colonized by Portugal, and the Pesida zone for those that had been colonized by Spain. So they all gradually exited from these monetary blocks when they had their independence. But this was not the case for the territories that had been colonized by France south of the Sahara. Because France anticipated that decolonization was inevitable. So it decided to concede independence, but without a real handover of its sovereign powers on sovereign domains. France conditioned the accession to independence of its former colonies in sub-Saharan Africa to the signature of so-called cooperation agreements in domains like foreign trade, foreign affairs, external trade, currency management, defense, strategic raw materials, etc. So there was a deal with the French government and the African elites. Most of them were trained in France, and even some of them were Ministry of Parliaments, members of parliaments in France. So the deal was the following: I grant you your territory is national independence, but I remain sovereign over all the domains above. And there is a telling quote from the French Prime Minister at that time, Michel Debré, who wrote a letter to his Gabonese counterpart, Léon Mba, in July 1960. He wrote in his letter, I quote, "We grant independence on the condition that the state, having gained its independence, endeavors to respect the cooperation agreements. The one does not go without the other." And as most African leaders were trained in France, they accepted to sign these agreements, all of them except for Sékou Touré, the Guinean trade unionist leader who demanded the independence of Guinea, which he obtained through a referendum in 1958, 2 years before the other countries under French domination, because in 1958, there was a referendum asking the territories whether they would like to have their independence. Only Guinea said, yes, I want independence. All the others wanted to, let's say, to share, to be part of the French Empire with some autonomy. You can find in this slide some example of cooperation agreements. For example, in the case of Gabon, the day Gabon obtained its formal independence, you could see in the cooperation agreement that I quote, "The Republic of Gabon commits to facilitating the storage of strategic materials and products to the benefit of the French armed forces. Should it become necessary for security reasons, it also pledges to limit or prohibit export to other countries." So this was something signed by Gabonese authorities the day of their independence. Another example of cooperation agreements signed by Congo, Chad, and Central African Republic about the monetary aspect. You could see, for example, it said that the states of Equatorial Africa confirm their membership of the monetary union of which they are members within the franc zone. all the revenue and expenditure operations of the states of Equatorial Africa will be made via the transfer of or purchase of foreign currency on the Paris foreign exchange market. So that meant that all the financial and commercial transactions had to pass through the Paris foreign exchange market. So that was the meaning of this agreement, and all their incomes in dollar or in other currency had to be converted mandatorily through the Paris foreign exchange market. So this is what we call in our book independence without its attributes. And you could see in this slide picture of Sékou Touré, the president of Guinea, who refused, let's say, these cooperation agreements and who exited from the CFA franc zone. But when he exited from the CFA franc zone, there was a vicious operation, imperialist repression called the Operation Persil, which sought to destabilize Guinea. This was implemented by the French secret services. They trained and armed political figures from the opposition to overthrow Sékou Touré. But a more vicious aspect consisted in using the printing presses of the French secret services to create counterfeit Guinean banknotes and to pour them en masse into the country. The operation was a total success. They said Guinea's economy, already very weak, never fully recovered. This is a quote from Maurice Robert, who was one of the masterminds of this operation. So you could see in this slide the picture of Maurice Robert, who was, let's say, the former boss at that time of the French secret services. And there was also imperialist repression against Mali and Togo. On the right-hand side, you could see the picture of Modibo Keita, a Malian socialist leader. He exited from the CFA franc zone, but he was overthrown from power. And he faced also sabotages from Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire because they put trade barriers against Mali in a way to, as a way of reprisal against Malian decision to leave the CFA franc. On the left-hand side, you have Sylvanus Olympio, the Togolese leader, who decided to issue Togolese national currency, but he was killed, let's say, days before Togolese national currency was issued. And since then, Togo is a member of the CFA franc zone and has no national currency until now. And there are many more examples of imperialist repression by the French. So one important question is if they are ready, the French have been really ready to do such act of sabotage and imperialist repression. What is the benefit to them of maintaining this monetary zone, the CFA franc system? And there is a very important report that has been published in 1970, which shows the kind of economic advantages that France obtains through this currency arrangement. And the first important advantage is that France can pay its imports from France zone countries in its own currency. And this is a really important advantage because it's a geopolitical advantage. In the world, all the international trade, mostly all international trade is invoiced in US dollars. And this confers the US dollar an exorbitant privilege. And France has the same in its former colonies because it could buy on credit everything that is of interest to the French economy. That means raw materials, goods, labor, services, etc. And one other counterpart to that is that it allows the French to save on their foreign currency reserves and keep up their own exchange rate. This was really important at the time of the French franc because the French franc was a very weak currency. Another advantage is that the French companies operating in the zone benefit from large and stable outlets for trade, so large trade surpluses. Another advantage is that the French economy benefits from a trade surplus with regard to the franc zone, but also the French benefits from the foreign exchange reserves of the countries using the CFA franc because those countries used to have also trade surpluses against the rest of the world. And some of these exchange reserves, which are deposited with the French treasury, have been sometimes used to pay France debts. And it's not me saying that, but the report from the Economic and Social Council, French Economic and Social Council. Another advantage is that the French companies can repatriate their revenue and capitals without any foreign exchange risks, because the French is in charge for the exchange and monetary policy, and because they make sure that the principle of free transfer policy is implemented with no exchange rate risk and no risk of transfer. That means no risk of lack of foreign exchange. And the last significant advantage is that France enjoys a system of political control serving its own economic interests that doesn't cost it anything, since its supposed convertibility guarantee has rarely been put into effect. In fact, as France is in charge of exchange and monetary policy, it has already made sure that the African central banks never needed its so-called convertibility guarantee. And indeed, what has happened is that the African Central Bank had rather financed the French Treasury, because they have always been in surplus at their own account in the French Treasury. And the French Treasury has often offered them negative interest rates. When we talk about negative interest rates, it means that the nominal interest rates less than the inflation rate. And the real exchange rate, the real interest rate measures your gains in terms of purchasing power. And in fact, the BCAO and the BEAC, the two central banks, have been losing money. That means their reserves have been losing purchasing power because they were offered negative interest rate. So it is as if they paid the French Treasury to keep their foreign reserves. That has been, let's say, the story, the financial story between the French Treasury and the so-called African central banks. I say so-called African central banks because there was a French court ruling which say that, yeah, the African central banks, in fact, work for French economic interests. In fact, the status of financial guarantor ensures that the French government has effective control over the monetary management of the countries in the franc zone. This point is confirmed by 2012 ruling handed down by the French Conseil d'Etat. The French Conseil d'Etat is the highest French administrative court. And below you could find an extract from this ruling, and it says, quote, the management and control of the BEAC. So the BEAC is the Central Bank of Central Africa. The management and control of the BEAC is notably ensured by France's representation within this body. The activity of the BEAC, which governs monetary cooperation between France and 5 Central African states, is of particular interest to the French economy. So there are many people defending the CFA franc, saying that it's a stable currency, it's a good currency, it's an African currency, and it delivers many benefits to African countries. But when you look at the data, you see that this is just, let's say, rhetoric and propaganda, because the sharing of this single currency has not been beneficial for their trade. If you look at the degree of regional trade between the African franc zone, you will see that it's just 10% on average of their external trade of its members. And in the CEMAC countries in Central Africa, you would see that the average is just 5% of their external trade. And the CFA franc, contrary to what is being said by its defenders, does not promote the financial attractiveness of the countries using it. You take just the case of West Africa, Ghana, which has its own national currency, floating currency. Ghana has a stock of foreign direct investment higher than all the 8 countries using the CFA franc combined. And you could see the data from the UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. In Central Africa, you could see that the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has, let's say, a very dollarized economy, so that means its economy is dominated by the US dollar, and foreign currencies, has a higher stock of foreign direct investment than 5 out of the 6 countries belonging to the CEMAC. Countries using the CFA franc had recorded lower inflation and exchange rate stability, yes, but this has been the result, let's say, of a deflationary macroeconomic framework, which has implied until now huge economic costs. And the huge economic costs, as for example, there has been no long-term development. And we could see that with the data, For example, you take the case of Ivory Coast, the largest Francophone country. It had a real GDP per capita 1/3 lower than in its 1978 peak. In 2006, its real GDP per capita was 1/3 lower than its 1978 peak. It's the same thing for Senegal, who had a real GDP per capita in 2016 of the same order of magnitude as its 1960 level. For the three largest countries of Central Africa, Cameroon, Congo, and Gabon, they have still not returned to the highest levels of real GDP per capita reached in 1986, 1984, and 1976, respectively. And if you take a look at other kind of indicator like the Human Development Index, you see that 10 out of the 4 CFA friend countries belong to the low human development group, and especially Niger, Central African Republic, and Chad, who are among the lowest ranked in the world. And so what is also important to say about the legacy of colonialism and also of the CFA franc as a colonial arrangement is that, yeah, it has not prevented the commercial and financial decline of France in its sphere of influence. I would say it has somehow helped, let's say, mitigate the inexorable inevitable decline of the French economy in Africa. But it has somehow cemented a political culture of authoritarianism, especially in oil exporting CFA countries, such as Gabon, the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea. But this also applies to Cote d'Ivoire and many countries. You would see that those countries are not really democratic, and sometimes the president for life model remains the norm, notwithstanding the frequent organization of formal elections with a foregone conclusion. The recent military coup in Chad, with the death of the Chadian despot Idriss Déby, gave rise to a new military government. This new military government is an unconstitutional government, has been backed by Emmanuel Macron. And for me, this is another illustration, the latest illustration of what is called pejoratively the France-Afrique. So in conclusion, I would say that the good news is that the African youth is standing up to say we no longer want this currency. We no longer want the continuation of the neo-colonial relationships with France. That's why you will see this slogan, France dégage, in the streets of Dakar and probably other streets in the Francophone countries. You could see images in Mali saying that, yeah, we no longer want French military, we no longer French domination, stop the CFA franc. So this is, I think, the good news about the CFA franc. But one thing we must also say is that, yeah, we have to put an end to CFA franc because it's necessary for African emancipation, but it won't be enough. It's just one aspect of colonialism, but it's not the whole aspects of colonialism. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Ahmed, you're muted. You're still muted.
The organizers can unmute his microphone. It's possible to unmute him.
I'm trying to do that. Dr. Ahmed, you're still muted. I'm trying to unmute your microphone and it's not allowing me to do that. You will have to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay, right, good. Sorry for that technical hitch. It sort of freezed and we were able to get it back. Now, thank you very much, Dr. Ndongo Sambasila. For all those who maybe joined us late for another introduction, He happens to be the program manager, West Africa office of the Rosa Luxembourg Foundation in Dakar, Senegal, and co-founder of CORA, that is Collectif pour le Renouveau Africain, and then co-authored Africa's Last Colonial Currency, the CFA franc story. We are not going to ask questions now. We'll defer the questions till we finish with all the speakers, and then we lump all of them together. So thank you very much, Dr. Silla. Our next speaker is Dr. Amin George Forge. He's a teaching associate, Faculty of Law, University of Manchester, UK, adjunct lecturer, Public International Law and Political Economy at the Faculty of Law, University of Helsinki, Finland, and a research fellow, Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science, that is HELSUS, and Helsinki Equality Initiative, INEC. Dr. Amin Forge, once again, thank you for coming. Thank you for gracing the occasion, but sorry for not being able to introduce you earlier because of some mix-up here. The floor is now yours, so let's listen to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm honored to be the next presenter. I have to share my screen as well. Can you see my screen?
We see your screen, but not your presentation. We currently see your web browser. If you want to restart your screen share,
let me stop sharing.
We're waiting on the screen to come.
There we go.
Yes,
you see now?
Good. Yes, we are there. Great.
Okay. Okay,
So
very good.
Right.
So I'll be talking today about neocolonialism in Africa, and I'm presenting it as the backbone of underdevelopment in the continent. So Africa has a peculiar resource curse problem, and the problem is 5 centuries. It's 5 centuries old, and the resource curse problem is like Africa is like extremely rich in terms of natural resources, but it is the poorest part of our world. And there's a particular theory that explains that paradox, and it's known as the paradox of the plenty. It's a phenomenon by which the parts of the world that are extremely rich in the natural resources, that are the poorest parts of our world. And when we talk of natural resources, it's not just the flora and the fauna. That's not just vegetation and the forest, but also peoples. And as we know, African peoples, for the large part, for many centuries between the 14th and 19th century, they were converted into property, the peoples who were converted into property, otherwise known as slaves, and transported to the Americas. And that had devastating effects. That's why I said it's like 4 to 5 centuries old. That had lingering effects, which I will be focusing a lot on. And because Africa is extremely rich in resources, the outside world see it as imperative for their own development. And they are constantly deploying a lot of techniques in order to control these resources. So again, 2 main kinds of resources I'm focusing on. First one, it is the peoples, and the second one, it is the raw materials or the natural resources. And this became more prevalent from the 19th century until present. And first, I will focus a little bit on colonization. By colonization, I mean the policy of acquiring full or partial control over a country by occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. In other words, it's like direct control. And this was what was prevalent from Africa since the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, and it lasted until the decolonization period in the 1960s. And Africa was colonized for a number of factors, which I will summarize. First, it was industrial revolution. So slave trade was no longer profitable. And industrial revolution, there was an industrial capitalism, industrial revolution across Europe, whereby there were factories, they needed to be powered by raw materials. So it became more profitable for Europeans to now use Africa. I mean, it became more profitable to go after the natural resources, and Africa had that in abundance. So Africa became the source of the raw materials to power the booming factories that were building up across Europe. It was also about European nationalism. So in acquiring colonies was a sign of grandeur. And then there was also the missionary activities. And as David Livingstone famously put it, the goal was for Christianity, it was for commerce, and was for civilization, or the three C's. But it can alternatively be translated as God, glory, and go. So it was also for military and naval bases, and also for places to dump unwanted or excess goods and also peoples. It was also for social and economic opportunities, for humanitarian reasons. And it was also marred with some European racism. There were a lot of theories that spread up in the 19th century, most notably the social Darwinism, but also they also projected it as a white man's burden. They had a mission to go and civilize the rest of the world. In other words, colonization is always built on the backdrop of progress, the idea of progress, the idea that you are going to give the backward people or other people that don't have enough something that they don't get. But the end goal actually is more economic. It's sort of to be your own progress, your own development, all of that. And that was very prevalent right at the onset. So the message we all get is that Africa was after the Second World War, there was a wave of decolonization. But is that true? I mean, what is understood is that Africa became independent since the 1960s and the 1970s, when the former colonial powers, following nationalist movements, they came to agreement like to give away control to the African peoples. But is that an accurate account? It's not quite. In essence, what I was shown by another concept of neocolonialism is that Africa became politically independent, but not economically independent. And what is neocolonialism? So it is the use of economic, political, and cultural or other means or other pressures to control and influence the former colonies or the former dependencies. In other words, is to maintain the control. No longer direct, as I said, colonization was direct, but this is to control them now with indirect methods, indirect means. And so the concept was first invented by a French socialist known as Jean-Pierre Sartre in 1956, but became to popular usage by the Ghanaian first president. He was a Pan-Africanist, Kwame Nkrumah, who you can see in the picture on the left slide, when he published a book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Capitalism, in 1965. The book was quite revolutionary, that it would cost him his presidency. When in essence, what he noticed is that even though African countries have become independent and the efforts to try to catch up in trying to copy the same development narrative or the same development template, which was prescribed to them by the colonial powers, they were not seeing it translating into growth, onto outright growth, at least for those that were trying. For many others, maybe they were not even trying. But for those that were actually trying to do something, the template was not working for Africa. And what was the reason? And then Nkrumah, he became more and more lineage towards the Marxist thinking, And when he wrote the book, of course, first of all, he painted him already as a Marxist. This was at the height of the Cold War. And some of the arguments that Nkrumah highlighted was that why actual colonization had ended, the influence of the former colonial powers is still lingered, it still remained in the colonies. And in a general sense, it was even more, in some sense, it was even more devastating because it could not easily be discerned. It was indirect. You could not see it. It was with indirect methods. So the economic influence of the colonial powers still lingered or was still constant. And there are some of the agencies that are most or responsible for this. These are like the Western states and corporations. And then you have like international financial institutions, that's like the IMF and the World Bank, especially by giving loans with conditionalities. They end up hurting more than helping. Then the African big men, this African big men, this could be like, they call themselves elites. They could be heads of states, directors. They are those that that monopolize power in the independent Africa. Then right now, we also have China that has come into place. And but most notably, which is one of the areas that's more glaring, is the France-Afrique, which, as Dr. Silla rightly explained, is most notable with the France CFA. Is manifested. I will not go to that because he very eloquently expressed the manifestation of how the France CFA is underpinning on that development and impoverishment in the French-speaking colonies. And then now there's also the new element of land grabbing. There is which is not even noticed. People don't even know. Africa is actually for sale at the moment. People don't even notice. So patches of lands are being sold in much of Africa with leases of 99 years. And after 99 years, the people could have restricted their population. You may not be able to get those back. So in other words, colonization is actually actively ongoing at the moment in Africa, and with all these manifestations going on. And at the end of the day, why are all these countries doing all of this? If it's causing underdevelopment and poverty in these places in Africa, it's because poverty is a project. There are winners and losers in poverty. And countries don't have friends. Countries have interests. They don't have friends. And so I will focus a little bit on the African big men. Like I said, these are the so-called African elites. But without them, all of these manifestations will not actually happen. They are the facilitators. They are the middlemen, the retailers that enable all this interdependence and this manifestation to take place. So the African big men, we have tax avoidance and tax evasion. They sign contracts behind closed doors. And the African big men, when they are sick, they get their treatment in the Western countries. They identify themselves more with the West than their own peoples. Their sympathies lie more with the former colonies or the former colonial powers than with the external powers. And the origins of the African big men is that most of them is constituted of people that were actually against independence in the first place. When African people they got independence, but they were met in the first place to rule the people because of their allegiance to the colonial structure that existed. So they became the right puppets in order to govern. And of course, over time, they transfer power within the same class structure. And there are divergence from their own peoples. So even without the colonial people being there, thanks to these puppets, the capitalists, they still continue to control the policies in African countries or to drive the policies. And where they cannot succeed, they sponsor militia groups or they sponsor rebel movements to either overthrow governments or to actually directly control the governments. Like the case of Congo. In Congo, like places of East Congo, many militia groups are sponsored because many Western society companies they need a coltan, which is quite a useful and expensive material. We need in our cell phones and we need in laptops. But with the militia groups, those militia groups, most of the illiterates, they don't even know the value. So if they control that area, then you can get them cheap. And then and it's about profits. It's about how much profit you can make. And it's still in Congo, when Lumumba was quite nationalistic, they had to put Mobutu. Mobutu could now do the dirty work, not to serve the interests of the Congolese people, but to serve the interests of the Western societies and the companies that were there. So Congo is rated to be the second richest countries in terms of natural resources, but it's among the 10 poorest countries in the world. So it falls again to what I said earlier on, like the natural resource curse theory. So I have a picture here that shows a manifestation of the African big men. So meanwhile, in the past, we had in the first picture, the Europeans were the ones that were impoverishing the African masses. So the person in chain is a depiction of the African masses. In the second picture, the African masses, their conditions have not changed, because now the new person who dresses the same and does the same job is now a fellow African. It's an African big man. He's doing worship. He uses violence, he uses all the methods, sometimes even more, in order to keep the people again in chain. And because of that, there's stagnation. And meanwhile, many African countries, countries like Cameroon, Ghana, and Senegal, they were about the same level of development, like with South Korea and Malaysia. But right now, looking at these countries together, they're a shadow. I mean, they will need maybe 50 years at this rate to become even to even get the GDP of a province in one of these countries, of these Asian countries. So Nkrumah proposed when he formulated when he wrote the book that he proposed that Africa should be united. He was a Pan-Africanist. He proposed for Africa to be united, and he suggested that so long as Africa remains divided, it will be the wealthy consumers countries or those abroad that will dictate the prices of its resources. So what we know, Africa, they specialize in cash crops till now, which is kind of pathetic at the moment. Most countries, they still talk about how the highest producers of cocoa or coffee. But the issue is, even those products, they don't determine the prices. These are the only products on earth that the price is not set by the producer, it is set by the consumer. So the price of a cup of coffee that I get here in the UK is equivalent, it's equivalent to the price of 25 bags of raw coffee in an African country. So at that rate, or even the price of a pen, of a pen is equivalent maybe to 5 kg of raw coffee in an African country. So even if the children of farmers that produce these cash crops, they are sick, they cannot go to a good hospital. They cannot send their children to a good university. So they work from dawn to dusk, and they don't generate enough profit. So you see, even at the level of the West system, there's already that discrepancy. But it's also because Africa, they have not come up with a buffer stock or a nationalistic system to set up, or structure to set up their own prices and to determine their own destiny. But Africa should be talking about manufacturing at the moment, not still talking about cash crops. And if at all they have to do cash crops, they need to be able to set up the prices by themselves. So, and why is it a problem? It's a problem because it creates a culture of dependency. It creates a culture of dependency between the African countries and the external, and to their detriment. It creates a situation of impoverishment, and then now it creates a situation of violence. That the gun, it becomes a way to set up the rules, and the big men they come in now to monopolize power, not to the benefit of the people, but to the benefit of the same people that are against their interests, that care less about the human welfare of those peoples. So the disadvantages of neocolonialism, well, one of the many disadvantages is, like I said, is the economic dependency on foreign Western nations. And also, it also creates a huge amount of debt build up in developing nations due to Western banks and loans with conditionalities. And then the manipulation and high exploitation of developing country resources. It creates a climate in which certain nations, they lower their standards in order to attract the Western business. They race to the bottom. For example, since many countries are so far behind, the only way they attract business now is like the tech companies. You know what? You can come to our country. There's no labor standards. There's no minimum wage requirement. All of that. They give all these kind of incentives that human right is not on the agenda. And it also creates internal and political strife within the nations and dissent against Western countries. If you go to many impoverished societies across Africa, there is a lot of anti-Western sentiment, and because of their conditions, some of them understand that some of their conditions is directly related. So in summary, I would say there is both a divergence and a correlation between old imperialism and new imperialism. Meanwhile, old imperialism, it dwells with settler colonization. The new imperialism is occupation of the mind or what Antonio Grassimi talks of hegemony, that once you already convince people that they are already subaltern, that they're already low, and they're already low standard, they start to believe. So there's already a colonial mindset within an Africa, one of being subservient to the system and accepting the condition the way it is. And then there's also development in theory. So in theory, like I said, both whether the old colonialism and the new colonialism, they are progressive. They give the illusion or the idea that they are coming to bring progress, jobs. And the new imperialism. So what kind of job is the mining giving? The mining jobs that it gives to dig the coltan, to give the Western companies, is one of poverty. It's one that leads to poverty. That's what I call development in practice. And so going forward, we should not see colonization as past, but as constant and continuous and going forward. And again, with regard to the big men, they are the wrong people that are monopolizing power or governing, administering the people as they don't serve the interests of the people. So I will end by saying that when power falls into the wrong hands, history is bound to be doomed, or it can easily be doomed. Thank you. Yeah, so that was it. Your mic.
Have you? Well, thank you very much, Dr. Amin George Forgy. Once again, for those who haven't heard of the introduction, Dr. Amin Forgy is a teaching associate, Faculty of Law, University of Manchester, UK, adjunct lecturer, public international law and political economy at the Faculty of Law, University of Helsinki, Finland, and a research fellow, Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science, that is HELSUS, and Helsinki Inequality Initiative, INEC. Thank you very much, Dr. Amin. Is it George or George for you? Okay. Those are some of the impact of colonialism in terms of language. Right. I haven't seen our ambassador yet. If the organizers could.
I'm here.
Are you on?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
I've been here.
And viewers, we have Her Excellency Dr. Ambassador Arikana Chihombori Kwao, former African Union Ambassador to the USA 2016 to 2019, and founder Africa Diaspora Development Institute, ADDI. And I would want to welcome her to Ghana, knowing very well her connection to Ghana, just as I also know of the connection between the president or the late president of your country to Ghana. But we are here for business. We are here for colonialism and its impact. And so, Honorable Ambassador Arikana Chihombori, we've heard from Dr. Ndongo Samba, who took us through, the challenges of the franc, and for that matter, the CFA franc. In fact, we were so impressed with his presentation. That was followed up with Dr. Amin George Forgy, who also gave us another dimension that is related to development, of course, as a development economist. Now to you as the ambassador, I'm not going to define your area of presentation, but you've had a lot of experience. You've been speaking almost everywhere, anywhere, and so on and so forth. How would you look at the topic on the table this evening?
Well, I think as I was listening to both speakers, who of course I want to congratulate for tremendous, beautiful presentations. This is the sort of education that we all need to receive as Africans, because quite often we are misguided. We don't understand what is really going on with our Africa. We are following somebody else's direction in terms of how we should think. And that is why quite often our fighting, our struggles are not yielding the results that we desire because of our lack of broad understanding of the forces at play. So if you would allow me, as I listened to them, I had to re-strategize and think about what other element can I bring to this conversation to really package it in a nice little package with a bow, so people have a take-home message to say, when we spent 2 hours together today, what did we accomplish? What did I hear? What is my take-home? And what can I really, what is my position in the process of building the Africa that we want, in the process of liberating the African, which of course, when it's all said and done, it boils down to you and I, our minds. So as I was listening, I thought about the African Tree of Life, which is the tree of life that we sing about in our African national anthem. I'm reminded that once upon a time, Africa was the Garden of Eden. There was a tree of life that was thriving, a tree that was giving out delicious fruits, beautiful flowers, until the invaders from the West descended upon our beloved continent. Piece by piece, they began to destroy the African tree of life to where we now have the African tree of life that is ailing so badly. There seems to be no hope of ever recovering this beautiful tree. So until we understand this ailing tree of life, it's going to be very difficult for us to begin to resuscitate our beautiful tree of life. So allow me to define the reasons why this tree of life is ailing into two groups. We have issues that are above the root of this tree. These issues are the ones we most often get to hear about, are the ones we tend to spend more time talking about and deliberating on, and completely disregarding the issues of the root. In my humble opinion, the issues of leadership, yes, we do have issues with leadership, but tell me which continent, which country does not have that? We have the issues of corruption. We have disease and starvation. We have poor access to healthcare, poor access to education, poor infrastructure. All those are issues above the root, and I equate them to the leaves and the flowers and the fruits and the branches that come and go from one season to the other. I equate it to change of leadership in Africa. Think of all the African countries that have had elections and they have had change of leadership. There's not a single one of them that has really attained true change. So as you can see, as long as we are focusing on issues above the root and completely disregarding issues below the root, we will forever be chasing our tails, which is why I was so glad that the two presenters before me, they have touched on some of the issues of the root. Allow me to highlight, in my humble opinion, 7 issues that I consider pivotal in our understanding of what is going on with our Africa. And that until we dismantle these systems, nothing we do is going to give us the desired results of the beautiful fruits and flowers above the ground. Issue number 1, when the invader first came to Africa, they found an incredibly powerful people with well-established educational, religious systems, societies that were functioning. We were too powerful for them. They wondered how on earth they could destroy such a people. They wondered how on earth they could conquer and take over such a people. So they decided to come up with a strategy to destroy our minds, to make us believe everything that had to do with us Everything about Africans was bad and everything European was better. They started with religion. They introduced the color scheme. After teaching us about the different gradations of color, yellow, green, black, white, they then came with religion and said, hey, by the way, there's a place called heaven. And in heaven, you're going to find angels. And the angels are white. And there's a place called hell. And in hell, you're going to find the devil. And the devil is black. And by the way, while we may not look like this white tablecloth, this white piece of paper we just told you about, we too are white. Never mind what we just told you. We are white like the angels. The angels are desirable. That is exactly what we all want to strive to be, like the angels. And they happen to be white like us. The devil is horrible. Does all the evil things. And by the way, you are black, just like the devil. Seems very simple and benign enough. But now let's go to church. Get on your knees. Let's worship the white angels. They even took Jesus Christ, who according to the good book, we all know he had hair like wool, crimson skin. Jesus Christ was a brown man. We know that to be true when Mary and Joseph were running away from King Herod. They were told to go to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because in Egypt, he would blend with others who looked just like him. If he was white, they could have sent him to Europe, but they knew he would stand out like a sawtooth. They even misrepresented the good book for the purposes of making us dislike ourselves. The process of Black self-hate, the process of mistrust of each other among us as Black people, the criminalization of Blackness, that process started long ago, long before the children of Africa were even taken out of Africa as slaves. It was a strategy that was implemented by the invader to completely destroy us so we can become instruments of our own self-destruction. I want each and every one of us as Black people to understand that we were intentionally brainwashed for the purposes of being completely defeated. Sadly, problem number one, in my opinion, problem number one of the root continues to this very day. It is precisely why one of the doctors, both Dr. Samba and Dr. Amin, alluded to the fact that now it is us Black people, us Africans, who are destroying each other. You no longer see the white men holding us in chains. It's another Black man dragging another Black man in chains. We have never recovered from that mental destruction, that self-hate. We've spent the rest of our lives. We go to church for those who are Christians. You get on your knees, you're worshiping a white Jesus. And in so doing, you're worshiping the white man. You're worshiping the angels, completely denying yourself, wanting to be something that you can never be. The process was intentional and we were programmed to be self-destructive. Question I have all of you is, for how long are we going to continue to believe in this lie? This lie is propagated from one generation to the other. It is so deeply destructive and leaves us completely paralyzed that even our leadership cannot stand up to little baby boy Macron. We cannot stand up to the obvious abuses because we are afraid. And in some cases, we think as long as it's a white man doing it, it's okay. How long shall we continue to believe in this simple, basic lie that is so destructive from such a deep, pivotal way? Issue number one, the mind. Being a devil or an angel has nothing to do with color. It's based on deeds. And yet, if you could walk into the streets of Africa today, ask the first 100 people, you ask, what color is the angel? What color are the angels? I can tell you almost 100%, they'll automatically say white without thinking. If you ask them what color is the devil, they'll automatically say black without thinking. But they don't realize how that sort of mindset, it drives everything you do. It drives how you see the world. We need healing. We must understand as Black people, we're not inferior to anybody and nobody is superior to us, plain and simple. Lie number one must be destroyed. Lie number one, as parents, we must tell our children, nobody is superior to you. And as Black people, we must have the guts to stand up. Ours is a position of righteousness when we fight and push back and defend our Africa. But because of the fear that has been passed from one generation to the other, our leadership at every level, we're scared. No amount of education can decolonize you. No amount of education training, you must understand that you are part of somebody else's agenda and somebody else's strategy. The question is, for how long? Issue number one.
Ambassador Kwao, sorry for cutting you, but you had 7 issues to actually go through.
Yes,
so,
the other ones are fast. The other ones
right.
are quick. I needed to spend time on this one because everything else becomes easier if we're clear on this one. The second issue is the Berlin Conference.
Okay.
Because they realized that they've dealt with our minds and now they went to the physical destruction of our beloved continent. They divided us up into the tiny little economies, and I will not dwell on the Berlin Conference because Dr. Amin spent a lot of time on it. Okay. Understand the Berlin Conference, you understand why Africa remains where Africa is today. The third issue, colonizers never left. Again, Dr. Samba alluded to that. The colonizers, after independence, they lay low. The companies, the multinationals that were there during colonization, they've never left. They continue to control most economies in Africa today. So understand that we're still dealing with colonization. The colonizers have never left. Issue number 3. Issue number 4, the financial policies, the world financial policies. Again, we alluded to those. The IMF, the World Bank, and many other financial institutions. In general, the average African country is spending 1/3 of their GDP on loan repayment. That's all by design to see to it that Africa and African countries will forever be chasing their tails with loans that have been paid 1,000 times over, loans that will never be able to finish paying. In most countries, what they're spending on loan repayment is more than what they're spending on education and healthcare combined. How then do we develop countries in such an environment? Issue number 4, the World Trade Organization that is giving a blind eye to all the atrocities being committed on Africa, systems that were created to make sure that we do not add value to our own natural resources. Until we can dismantle some of these processes. One mineral alone, you take coltan. If we were to say not every microchip that requires coltan must be manufactured in Africa, can you imagine how many jobs we can create with that one simple microchip? Every cell phone, every laptop, every electric battery. Let's take our cocoa beans out of Africa. If we can just say Africans must manufacture our own chocolates, our own Milo, our own hot cocoa, can you imagine how many jobs that can be created? Cocoa beans out of Africa have built a whole city in the United States, Hershey City, a whole city in the United Kingdom, Cadbury, city of Cadbury. Where is Hershey City? Where is Cadbury City in Africa? cocoa alone, we could put a big dent in unemployment in Africa. So the World Trade Organization designed to keep Africa where they want Africa to be. Those policies must be dismantled. Issue number 6, the brain drain out of Africa. Let's make no mistake about it, my brothers and sisters. Today, as we speak, there's not a single African country that has the capacity to build an airport. There's not a single African country that has the capacity to build a railway line. However, within Africa, we have the capacity to build an airport, to build a railway line, but because we are divided, we do not have the capacity. And even in some cases, if we were to pull all the Africans together, sectors like healthcare, Africa today needs about 1.3 million doctors. We have about 40% of the need. So no amount of money put into healthcare could give the desired results. The diaspora, there are more Ghanaian doctors in New York City than in the entire country of Ghana. There are more Nigerian doctors in Los Angeles than in the entire country of Nigeria. The same is true with education, with engineering, and all other specialties. The brain drain out of Africa that started with taking the children of Africa as slaves, followed by those who left in search of greener pastures. The end result is Africa does not have all the capacity Africa needs for us to build the Africa that we want. It is precisely for this reason that we have countries like China that are coming into Africa with their financial resources and their expertise, and they're getting a carte blanche entry into our beloved continent. Same thing with all the other countries that are coming into Africa. The Middle Easterners have mobilized, they're coming in big. They have two things: financial resources and the capacity. The reversal of the brain drain out of Africa is something that we must look at seriously. The mobilization of the African diaspora and organizing them to make sure that they have an easy entry into Africa and continue to join our brothers and sisters on the continent in building the Africa that we want. The brain drain out of Africa, in my humble opinion, is issue number 6. And last but not least is the United Nations, the entity that was designed to be the watchdog for human rights abuses around the world. And yet who is in the UN Security Council? The same nations that are some of the biggest abusers of human rights around the world, particularly in Africa. I like to say, France today remains the biggest risk to peace and security in Africa. And yet France is one of the 5 members of the UN Security Council. What sort of decisions do you think they're going to make? The United Nations, the entity that's supposed to protect human rights around the world, is a toothless bulldog. In my humble opinion, if I had my way, African nations should not belong to the United Nations. We are going there just to validate whatever decisions they make. The largest voting bloc in the world is not a member of the UN Security Council. How ridiculous is that? Why haven't we stood up and said enough is enough? Why can't we just walk out of the United Nations and let them know that we are not here to validate your processes, to validate the same systems you have put in place to destroy us, and you're bringing us in to validate them? Again, it all goes back to the mind. Our inability to look at the obvious facts, the obvious ridiculous things that are happening, that are being done to Africa. We cannot stand up and say, enough is enough. Stop it. What is wrong is wrong. What is right is right. What is it going to take for us Africans in leadership, to stand up and not accept what they know very well they would never accept, not for a minute, in their own nations? What they will not accept for a second in their own Western nations, they're doing it every day in our beloved Africa. And we know it's happening But those in positions of leadership, for one reason or another, we are not fighting back. We are not uniting for the purposes of defending our continent. And like I started by saying, our inability to address all these issues that I feel are issues of the root, it goes back to the mind. How long are we going to sit back and continue to pass this stupidity from one generation to the other? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency Ambassador Arikana Chihumbori-Quao, for that soberly reflective presentation. It has moved some of us, and the call for change is actually timeless. But allow me to start with the questions. And for those who are watching us and listening to us, please, we have a question, an answer or answers box on Zoom. And so if you have any question whatsoever, please just go to the question and answer or Q&A box and then file your questions. We would put them across to the various speakers. And so you can do that from now. Now, I would start with our ambassador. You have worked extensively with various groupings on this matter. You have had the opportunity of being at the working for the AU. You've championed the cause, and I'm sure there's no disagreement on that. Generations have passed, and from one generation to the other, you may not have the entirety of the African population coming out as one voice. Of course, the African Union, the AU, is part of it. Do you see any trend in current times, specifically related to the youth of today, that they can carry this mantle of activism to ensure that this sort of cause that you are making and others are making would at least get to a point where we would say, yes, we are starting something good?
Well, I have a lot of faith and hope in our youth. But remember, yes, our youth are going to be empowered through the knowledge that we share with them. They cannot be empowered in a vacuum. And it is our responsibility as elders to give it to them straight, so they fully understand from the root cause, which is why I talked about ailing tree of life. If they could understand our issues for what they are, and not just be made to kill each other during an election that was already been decided upon by the powers that be as to who is going to be the next president. Our children are being thrown a shiny object, and they're running after the shiny object when the real issues are in the opposite direction, which is why I'm very glad that we're having these platforms. These are platforms that are going to help our children understand, so they won't follow the shiny object, so they won't kill themselves over nothing. We need to understand that as a continent, we are under siege. Yes, while we fight for the right things to be done in our neighborhood, while we fight for the right things to be done in our nations, but we must understand our Africa from a broader context, from the 7 issues I talked about, those root causes of why Africa is where Africa is. If we truly want true change, it all boils down to African integration. complete integration, single African currency, single military, single monetary policy, single stock exchange. We have to be united. And what is keeping us from taking those positions? So we need to educate our youth. When our youth are informed and they understand what is really going on, they can begin to organize, because they are our future. They can be the ones that we can begin the journey of turning the corner, but they must also know that we have paved a clean path. When they are fighting, they know exactly what fight they are fighting, what cause they are fighting for, and the desired outcomes. So history, education of our youth, we the elders, we have a responsibility to inform them so they know the truth, so they can move away from the lies that even you and I, my brother, we grew up in. We must educate our youth. They are our future. Well-equipped, well-armed with knowledge, our children, our youth can take us to where we need to be.
Right. Right. As a follow-up, before I come to Dr. Silla, and Dr. Silla, prepare to tackle this question. If the ECHO has made, a difference with the CFA, that you will be answering in a jiffy. But back to Ambassador. In Ghana, for instance, I don't know of other places, the study of history is being in our schools these days. The focus is on ICT, the focus is on technology. History to some of our leadership is no longer, relevant. So for instance, in Ghana, you do not have history as a subject, even at the lower levels. It's boxed up with, social studies. So I want to find out, without history, appreciation of the need, do you think we'll be able to make it? Because people study more of America, Europe than their own continent, and for that matter, their own localities.
Again, it goes back to what I said, back to the mind. Nothing stops the Minister of Education from changing the curriculum. We're still using colonial textbooks in most African countries. What is stopping the Minister of Health in every African country to change the curriculum? It goes back to the mind. They probably are not even thinking about it.
Right.
The issue is so much the mind that we need to inform ourselves. Nothing is stopping the ministers of education across Africa from changing the curriculum, from introducing history, from making it mandatory. It is just that simple. This, we can't even blame the colonizers. And that's why I spend time on the mind, because at the end of the day, everything goes back to the mind. I was asked to speak one time at the World Bank by the Africa group. And when I was done, of course, I spoke about, the Berlin conference and all that. As I was walking out, 2 African economists at the World Bank followed me and said, well, Ambassador, why are we still talking about the Berlin conference? It's a thing of the past. This is 2 Africans, economists, who are representing Africa at the World Bank. They thought Berlin conference was a thing of the past and we should be talking about it. Do you realize the depth of our problems?
Right.
So yes, my brother, I'm gonna keep hitting the mind, the mind, the mind. Even that minister needs healing, because what is keeping him from changing the curriculum? It is needed, must be made mandatory history, and that is where we need to begin. Wake up, Africa. It's that simple.
Thank you very much. And to Dr. Silla, as I said, you are looking at the ECHO, whether it has made any difference, with the CFA.
Well, I have to say at the outset that there has been a confusion regarding the ECHO. We could say which ECHO, because originally ECHO is the single currency project for the whole region of ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. And even ECO is a short for ECOWAS, you know. But what is truly astonishing is that on December 21st, 2019, Emmanuel Macron and Ouattara in Abidjan say that the CFA franc would be renamed ECO. That is the same day when all the other countries of West Africa were gathering in Nigeria to decide about the launch of their single currency, regional single currency, you see. And since Macron and Ouattara said that they will rename the CFA franc ECO, they have created a confusion, you know. And this has been an act of theft and sabotage by Macron and Ouattara. And now many people are talking about the ECO, the ECO, the ECO. There is even a colloquium at the end of this month in Lomé about the so-called transition from the CFA franc to the ECO. And you know, the roadmap they use in this colloquium is a roadmap defined by the French Treasury. And you see it's African intellectuals, African government implementing this roadmap. So I could say which ECO, you see. So the ECO CFA franc is just the CFA franc under another name. But the thing is that there is no legal text saying that the CFA franc will be renamed ECO. As to the original ECO of the ECOWAS, myself, I am not favorable to that ECO, but for different reasons. The main reason is that this so-called ECO by the ECOWAS is itself a copy-paste of the Eurozone dystopia. I would not say Eurozone model, but Eurozone dystopia. The thing is that if you want to have functional single currency between states, you must have at least a federal government. That means a federal treasury, like in the United States, you see, because you could not have a single currency which is not backed by the power of a state. If African countries want to share a single currency, they should have a minimum in terms of political unity, political integration. If you miss that step, you will have a dysfunctional currency like the euro, because the euro is a dysfunctional currency. They even acknowledge those who created the euro. Retrospectively, they acknowledge that they have put the cart before the horse. So you see, from historical times, every time a currency is issued, it has been backed by the power of a state. So you could not have let's say, a regional or continental currency without having a regional or continental government, you see. But as Africans, we are still mimicking what the Eurozone is doing. And that's why the likes of Macron and Ouattara, they know that we will postpone again the launch of the ECO from the ECOWAS, because it's not based on, let's say, sound criteria, political criteria, and willingness to integrate people. You know, what is sad is that we Africans, we have put as let's say, criteria of entry in the future ECO zone, I mean the ECO of the ECOWAS, criteria from the Eurozone, which have been put forward by Germany in order not to be, let's say, in a solidary position with other European neighbors. Because the Germans say to their European neighbors, we are not interested in the Eurozone, but if you want us to join the Eurozone, you have to have your public finance right. And to that end, they put what has been called the Maastricht criteria. That means criteria of entry of sound finance. You have to have a lower public deficit. You have to have a lower public debt, etc. Those are neoliberal criteria, but they do not, let's say, correspond to any other, let's say, sound economic reasoning. And you know, those criteria are laid down by Germany in order not to be in solidarity terms with its neighbors. We Africans, we have copied, pasted that in order to say that if we do not meet this criteria, we cannot have a regional currency. So that is what is sad. So the ECOWAS currency is a dead end. That's why Macron and Ouattara profited from that, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. My second question to you then is it possible for the international financial institutions like the World Bank to play a positive role, in building the Africa that Africa wants? I know this is quite, interesting question, and we're asking this because we are told that our countries are members of the, international financial institutions, and so they do have a say. If they do really have this say, why wouldn't it be possible for them to really look at the sort of policies that they have which are detrimental to the African continent?
Well, I would say that your question is really provocative. I think, based on history, that it is wishful thinking to think 1 second that the likes of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization could play a positive role in Africa development. I don't think so. Because those institutions have been created as agents of US imperialism, US global imperialism. And if you look at the records, historical records, you have clear, let's say, evidence for that. For example, there is a declaration, a statement by one of the World Bank president, Eugene Black. I can send it afterwards. He was saying that the World Bank has been put into place in order to promote, let's say, US goods abroad, US investment abroad, and also making sure that the peripheral countries have, let's say, economic and financial and political systems that are, let's say, friendly to US investment, you see. So those kind of institutions, they could play no positive role. And most countries that were previously colonized and that managed to, let's say, to develop a bit, were countries that delinked with institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. You could not have development with the World Bank and IMF. They are just, let's say, agents of imperialism defending, let's say, interests of, let's say, private finance. And now they are defending what is called the Wall Street consensus. That means that first privatizing public projects, public goods in the name of global private finance. And unfortunately, most African countries, let's say, have, let's say, going into that trend, and that what explains this boom of so-called public-private partnerships. And those are, let's say, budgetary time bombs for African countries.
Well, it then takes us back to our honorable ambassador's, point. If you are in and you seem not to be hitting your target, then why be there? But it's easier said than done.
Actually, if I may,
yes,
can I chime in, my brother?
Right.
What is needed is a complete change of strategy. What is needed is for Africa to have Africa's own money. We have natural resources. The Tiger 5 nations, the Malaysians, the Hong Kongs and all that, they were built on paper money, on monetization of gold, a lot of it coming out of Africa. We need a complete re-strategizing. We can no longer continue to go to the same institutions whose sheer survival is based on our failure. Let me underscore that. Their sheer survival is based on our failure. How can we depend on them to get us out of the conditions that we're in? They put us there and they're making sure that we stay there. A complete change in strategy is needed. We have the resources that we need to take care of ourselves. They have stolen from Africa for centuries, but fortunately, we are blessed with so many natural resources. The studies are saying they've taken maybe roughly 10% of Africa's natural resources. There is still plenty and more natural resources are being discovered. The goodwill, the willingness to re-strategize is not there. But we need a complete different strategy. Continuing with these financial institutions is not going to take us anywhere.
Right. George, I've seen that your palms are up. The question, I don't know whether you want to actually address this question that I've just posed, but my question for you is, If you look at the whole scenario, do you have an idea as to how we can get rid of this big men? Yeah, Dr. Amin.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I did not realize my hand was actually up. I may have clicked it by mistake. Yeah. Okay. Getting rid of the big men. I would say there are legitimate means of getting rid of the big men and illegitimate means of getting rid of the big men. And I would say both means may actually be legitimate. Let me take the case of Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara is a modern African leader. He did not come to power through the legitimate means, but in the eyes of many Africans, or in the eyes of people that think that who understand his contribution to humanity, his illegitimate means was actually legitimate because it was putting the people first. He was the exact opposite of what I talk about. Thomas Sankara, he was in power just for 4 years, but he left a legacy that I would say 98% of African leaders will never be able to come close to. The ambassador talked about African leaders not having the capacity to build railways. Burkina Faso was one of the poorest countries when he came to power, and they were used as indentured servants in Cote d'Ivoire for cocoa. I mean to pick cocoa and everything. But when Thomas Sankara came, he wanted a self-sufficient people. He started by changing the name of the country to the name Burkina Faso. It was called Upper Volta. He changed it to Burkina Faso, which meant Rhine of upright people. He wanted to make them feel confident, comfortable, and people that they were not inferior, because they had been made to feel inferior, as if they were inferior to Ivorians, because Ivorians were richer, but they were not rich. But Thomas Sankara dismissed that idea. It's about the mind. He dismissed the idea. He said, "We are upright people." The name remains today, and so that boosted them. First of all, he banned the importation of Western clothes. He said that they have enough cotton; they can produce their own cotton. And the local farmers who never thought they could have an income of their own just by producing cotton, because cotton was not compulsory. They had to produce cotton within Ivory Coast. The military attires were sewn with Burkinabe cotton, and that really enriched the population. And about vaccine, he vaccinated the whole country in a space of 1 week. Actually, the WHO gave him an award for that. And about the railways, he did have money to build railways, and he mobilized the whole population, and they build railways with their own hands. They build roads, I mean, with all kind of, I mean, like with digging with the normal rudimentary holes and everything, but he had the impact. And he was not about riches. And then he got rid of all this kind of excessive shiny cars, and he banned first class, and he did a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, it is the people that he put first, and he wanted to get rid of imperialism. He wanted people to be self-sufficient. So that's one instance of a benevolent dictatorship, an instance of getting it through an illegitimate means. But ultimately, maybe the most legitimate means will be through the ballot box. But the truth is, the elections in Africa, there are contradictions in terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I want to go to your field, which is development, economics. What are the patterns of development during and post-colonialism that you think has been a contributing factor to the development situation of the continent?
Development is a very complicated term. It is sometimes, yeah, development at the onset. It was a deceptive term. It was a deceptive term. The development as we know it today was actually framed by Harry Truman and his inaugural address, or his second swearing-in ceremony. And the reason, and why was development coined? Development was coined to replace colonization. It was coined to depict a new chapter. So I personally, I'm not. It was going to replace colonization, and it was going to promise the third world that we are turning a new chapter. A chapter of colonization has ended, and we are turning a new chapter to one of joint prosperity, one day we will help you guys to get to where we are at the moment. But at the back of it, it was actually meant to maintain the structures, because this was a time when there was an alternative. The alternative was the Soviet Union. And but it was meant to convince them that, you know what, stay within the frame of capitalist development or Western capitalism. And but the ultimate goal was to maintain the same frame. It was just a change of word. So ultimately, development itself is not designed. It's actually not designed itself to literally liberate, but it is designed to maintain a structure that had been in place since the 16th century, the world order as we know it today. So I would say I'm not particularly a fan of that. But however, I would say development also has overtures. It also has openings for emancipation. So you can also appropriate development in the right way, by being self-sufficient, or by emancipating yourself, and you can appropriate in the right way, and I think you will get somewhere. For example, the Asian tigers, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, they have appropriated development in a way that benefits its people. But if you operate development to take instructions from some other person, you will never go anywhere. You will just be stagnant. Yes.
Right. So what will be your reaction to anybody who says that Africa is not making it for reasons such as our inability to develop what is already there? Because other countries have been able to develop what they already have. So it is the inability to develop or improve what we have, like our natural resources, that is leading us into the situation in which we find ourselves. How relevant would this be in the context of the discussion that we have?
I would say that the main thing preventing Africa from developing is Africans themselves. Other factors are secondary. The primary handicap preventing Africa from developing is Africans themselves. If Africa wants to develop, they will. A very good example is Botswana. Again, because I like to go to statistics. Botswana was among the 12 poorest countries in 1960. The 12 poorest countries in the world. As we speak today, it's an African success story. It's the best country in Africa in terms of success. And they did that by just one resource, diamond. So that Botswana has a tiny fraction of what you will find in, Botswana has maybe 5% of what you will get in Katanga province in Congo. But Botswana is a second world country. It's not a third world country. It's a second world country. It's an African success story. So it's possible. If you don't want to put the people first, that is workable. The issue is much of African resources, GDP, is being siphoned and stored in tax havens in the former colonial countries, in France, in Switzerland, in Cayman Island, in Britain. And if nothing stops an African leader from building a hospital, from building a school of international standard or universal standard, or from preventing his own population and making them feel at home. I think I would rather be more comfortable speaking from an African capital than speaking from London, where I am at the moment. So, and that is beholden on to African countries to make the condition conducive for its people to feel at home. Let's take the case of also the Black Americans. When they think of going on holidays, where do you think they go? They will think anywhere else in the world except Africa, because Africa has never been made a friendly, hospitable place for its own people or people that look like them. So their problem primary is Africans, secondary is the external, in my opinion.
Well, thank you, Doc. To Ambassador, there is a question from Chantal to you. She wants to thank you very much for breaking down this reality. But then she poses an interesting question. How can we fight back and defend our continent?
Well, this, like I said, this is why I started with the African Tree of Life.
Right.
Because when you understand it, then you need to figure out which areas you need to start fighting with first. While I would like to say, maybe the struggle could be a little easier in some other African countries except the French-speaking ones. Why? I feel a certain sense of hopelessness when it comes to those countries, You have France with its military presence in your country, and they can invade you without notice. You are completely infiltrated by France intelligence. Nothing you do can be done without approval from France. I was attending, and this was now African Union, I was attending a strategic plan for the implementation of the AFCFTA at the African Union. And during break, we had lunch, and I was sitting at a table with 10 other people. Most of them were ministers. And one minister very casually said, and I was expecting people to be shocked, but he said it very casually, did we get permission from France? If we don't get permission from France, none of this implementation is going to work. To my utter surprise, everybody on the table was in agreement. I was shocked. I was shocked. If we do not get permission from France, the implementation of the AFCFTA is not going to succeed, and everybody was in agreement. How sad is that? How do you fight back? Let's be serious. We can try and change things in our neighborhoods, in our small countries, but true, real change and ownership of our continent, we are far from it. And that's what Africa needs today. The colonizers, the multinationals that go back to colonization, next to the government, they are the largest employers in most of these countries. Even those countries that are deeming middle class. They're all being graded that way because of the activities of the multinationals and their families who now reside in those countries, are now citizens of those countries, and they are the majority of the employers, and they own most of that wealth. Namibia is a case in point. The people who are doing well in Namibia are not Namibians. They are Germans who are now Namibians. And so Namibia is struggling to access certain funds because they've been reclassified because of the well-doing Germans who are now Namibians residing in Namibia. So it's not an easy thing when a country cannot make complete 100% decisions on how to develop your country, because the bigger forces are always lurking there. They're always trying to see how they can destabilize you. So it's a tough one, which is why I kept saying it goes back to the mind. If we can get 54 Thomas Sankaras in Africa, now you're talking. Now we don't even need 54 Thomas Sankaras. Give me 10 Thomas Sankaras who can stand up and who can push back, who can say once and for all, France, get out. How are you going to get France out of Africa? Let's be serious. 50% of everything in French-speaking countries is coming from France. There are vegetables, everything. It's not an easy thing to do. It's easier said than done. But I think the biggest challenge for Africa right now is France. But now France has gone on into the rest of the African countries. When they were I was looking at a conference that was held by the African heads of states. I think they were strategizing on COVID. The only Western country president that was there was France. The question was, why France? France is ending up being in the middle of everything. So let's understand the geopolitics while we're trying to deal with issues within our nation and our neighborhood.
Right, thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador. To Dr. Silla, I'd want you to address that. It used to be bad and it's still bad, but there is a school of thought that thinks that with the current president of France, Macron, there seemed to be a window of opportunity for the Francophone to reorient, their relationship with France. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it is a view that has been developed and held by, let's say, some commentators, but I do not obviously subscribe to that view. For me, Macron is a French president, and a French president, whatever its political color, left, right, extreme left, is always seeing the former, let's say, empire,
for us,
yeah, as something to be dominated, you see. So the relationship with Africa is always a relationship of domination. So even if personally he had the best, let's say, will for Africa, he can't change that because he's a French president, you see. But Macron himself, I think he is much more aggressive than the former president, because Macron comes from the finance, let's say, environment. He's a financial person. And so he's defending the interests of private finance in Africa. We wrote an article with one of my colleagues named Daniela Gabor, and we were describing the tenets of what is called the Macron doctrine in Africa. So that means privatizing whatever could be privatized, and to create opportunities for lucrative investment.
We have less than 2 minutes to end the session.
Yeah, but what I just want to say is that I am less pessimistic than Her Excellency, because I think that the African youth has understood that.
I'm sorry. Time is fast. Time is against us. And so to our viewers, I'd want to once again congratulate and thank our speakers for their wonderful work done. Their discussions, the debate continues. It shouldn't end here. And we are going to play back this particular interview on our network again and again, at least for our students here at the University of Ghana and the city of Accra as a whole. So Dr. Ambassador Arikana Chirombori, Her Excellency, we thank you very much for participating. Dr. Ndongo Sambasila, thank you also, salute you for a wonderful presentation. And Dr. Amin George Forji, also thank you for your presentation. To the organizers, you've done a good job in putting this particular program together. Once again, thank you. We hope you continue to do that. Well, my name is Abubakar Siddiq Ahmed, and I am also privileged to be called upon to host as well as be the moderator of the program. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and let's keep talking.